All right, good evening. This is Chair Justin Cooley, and I would like to call this regular meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. So before we call roll, I'd like to announce that Vice Chair Houghton and I have been appointed by the council to an additional 4-year term. Congratulations. And would Deputy City Clerk Megan Wilbanks please call roll?
Commissioner Flores?
Here.
Commissioner Jorgensen?
Here.
Commissioner Khan?
Here.
Commissioner Munoz-Morris is absent at this time. Commissioner Tully?
Here.
Vice Chair Houghton?
I'm here.
Chair Cooley?
Here. All right, the next item on the agenda is election of chair and vice chair, and it's hard to believe it's already been a year. So as required by the Planning Commission bylaws, we will hold the annual election of chair and vice chair to a 1-year term. Do I have any nominations for the position of chair? See a light on.
I'd like to nominate David Houghton as the chair for this coming year.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Commissioner Houghton, will the Deputy City Clerk, actually any discussion? Okay. The Deputy City Clerk, please call roll.
Commissioner Jorgensen?
Here?
Commissioner Khan?
Yes.
Yes, I should have said yes.
Commissioner Flores?
Yes.
Commissioner Tully?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Houghton?
Why not?
Chair Cooley?
Yes.
That motion passes.
All right, congratulations.
Thanks.
I'll do one more thing. Do I have any nominations for the position of vice chair?
Looks like me.
Yeah, go for it.
Must be the white hair. I'd like to nominate Eric Tolley for vice chair. And I'm kind of also paying attention to the seniority and how this works here. I think that's always a pretty good, smart solution.
And I'm assuming Commissioner Tully is willing to serve as vice chair. All right. I don't think anyone asked him before being nominated.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second for Commissioner Tully as vice chair. Will the Deputy City Clerk please call the roll of the motion?
Commissioner Jorgensen?
Yes.
Commissioner Khan?
Yes.
Commissioner Flores?
Yes.
Commissioner Tully?
Yes.
Vice Chair Houghton?
Yes.
Chair Cooley?
Yes. Congratulations. All right, and just, I'm assuming we want to take a little break to reshuffle. Is that correct? Just before we do, I just wanted to thank my fellow commissioners and city staff. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you for all your assistance.
Nice job. Yeah. Yeah. Nice job.
Grab your plate. There's some little white mic ID card at the side of your mic. Yep, just pull it out. Take it to your new spot.
Don't zap
You can
anybody.
just come with all of us.
Okay. Should I take this card?
Yes. And your name,
I'm back.
Do you go to the end or do you stay here? I guess you stay here. There we go. You're back. Uh-oh.
Okay, everybody good? All right. Next item on the agenda, public comment for items not on the agenda. So at this time, we will hear any public comment for items not on tonight's agenda. Items raised are generally referred to staff, and if action is by the commission is necessary, may be scheduled for a future meeting. Deputy Clerk, do we have any public comment on non-agenda items?
No, Chair, I haven't received any requests to speak. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to speak at this time, let me know. Okay, seeing none.
And let's recognize that Commissioner Munoz-Morris has arrived. Nice to see you.
Thank you, noted.
Okay. We're on to the consent part of the agenda. Consent calendar items consisting of matters deemed routine and non-controversial by staff. They are typically acted upon with one vote. However, if a member of the commission wishes to pull an item for individual consideration, please say so now. I actually would like to pull the abandonment of the right-of-way. So I think that's worth a little bit of discussion. So not extensive, but I think it's the first time I've ever done that. So that's my request. Is that all I have to do? Just say that? Okay.
Yeah, and we'll take a separate vote for the minutes, and then we'll come back and consider the next item.
Okay. Okay. So public comment is accepted for all items. Deputy Clerk, do we have any comment on consent items?
No, Chair, I haven't received any requests.
Okay. So now if item 4B is pulled, right, Colin, just, so now we have a vote on the minutes, right? Okay. Are there any other, well, we're not, so the minutes are in the consent, right? So are there any other comments from commissioners on the consent items? Okay. Do we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda with the pulled item?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Will Deputy Clerk please call the roll on this motion?
Thank you, Chair. And just to clarify, we're only approving the minutes at this point. We'll come back and reconsider the next item separately.
Sounds good.
So Commissioner Khan,
Yes.
Commissioner Munoz Morris,
Yes.
Commissioner Flores.
I'll abstain as I wasn't there.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Jorgensen,
Yes.
Vice Chair Tully,
Yes.
Commissioner Cooley,
Yes.
and Chair Houghton.
Yes.
And that motion passes.
So item 4B, that's what we're going to tackle next, is that right? And I'll read this public hearing piece first. So any court challenge to the action taken on public hearing items on this agenda may be limited to the considering only those issues raised at the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the City of San Luis Obispo at or prior to the public hearing. If you wish to speak, please give your name and address for the record. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. So at this point, we'll go on to item 4B, which is the request to abandon the 10-foot public right-of-way between 1998 and 2006 San Luis Drive in the R1 zone and STAB 0759-2024. So the recommendation before us is to adopt a draft resolution finding that the abandonment of the 10-foot public right-of-way between those houses is in conformity with the general plan and recommend that the City Council approve the abandonment by adopting a resolution of vacation. So that's the introduction to this topic, and I'll just tee it off by saying I've been over to the spot, I've looked at the map, I've looked at Google Earth, I've gone over the bridge that connects behind the Monday Club to that neighborhood, and I'm just loath to let go of any public right-of-way because I understand that there's some limitations on this, on what could be done. I think that there are these pathways that connect our neighborhoods and make it easier for pedestrians and bicycles to not have to drive from point A to point B and go all the long way around are really crucial. All of our new developments have a lot of this kind of element in there. And there's another, I have a question for staff too, because there's another right-of-way that is down the road. Let's see if I can get this right. I had it on Google Earth. It's about 2 or 3 blocks to the west, and there's another one shown on in the detailed map. So I'm asking, what is the status of that one? Is that also likely to come up for abandonment? And is there any possibility of connecting that right of way and turning it into something that might connect to back over towards Monterey Street, towards the commercial area there? And in general, I just want to comment that our creek is, I think, an underutilized resource in our city. And anything that we can do to increase the access to it and the appreciation and celebration of it is going to be a good thing. And so for those reasons, I really would not like to see this right-of-way abandoned, nor the other one. So, and then a follow-up question, are there other right-of-way opportunities out there? We don't have to go too deep on that. So, so I have a question for staff there, and what can we say about that? I guess I'm directing it here.
So your first question was kind of, are there any other similar public roads in the neighborhood? I think you might be referring to the road between 1395 and 1401 Casadero in that neighborhood. Is that correct? It's not necessarily going to the creek, but rather it's on the other side of that neighborhood. There's also another one between, and actually that right-of-way connects to that adult school.
The one I'm looking at is, it comes up against El Centro off of San Luis Drive. So it's shown on this map that's part of the package. And so it's this one right here. And it goes also to the creek from San Luis Drive.
Is it between 1890 and 1900 San Luis Drive?
This map does not have street addresses. It's between lots 8 and 9 on the subdivision.
Okay. I would imagine it's the 1890 and 1900 San Luis Drive.
Does that sound right? Okay.
That does sound right. I kind of did take a broad look at that neighborhood and see if there was any other similar public roads. And like I said, we identified 1395 and 1401 Casadero, which, like I mentioned, does connect to that adult school next to that neighborhood, and to my knowledge is currently being utilized as a waste collection area for that school. So I would imagine that public row is not up for, consideration for some type of abandonment in the near future. If it were, it would have to go through, I would imagine it would go through a more intense, or not intense, but thorough abandonment process, being the general vacation process under the California Streets and Highway Code. It would involve more public hearings, 2 items at council. As far as the 1890 and 1900 San Luis Drive, that's shown on that very old map from 1947. That one was actually abandoned by resolution in 1999. It's probably the most similar to the current one from, today's staff report between 1998 and 2006. They both connected to the creek, or connect to the creek back there. And like I said, that was abandoned by resolution in 1999 by the Planning Commission.
So you're talking about this one it's on this map, this old map, but you're saying it's already been abandoned?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So there's no other right-of-ways that go through from San Luis Drive to the creek that might possibly connect to this subject 10-foot right-of-way?
That's correct.
And is there any possibility of a right-of-way or a path or any kind of public access along the creek that would possibly connect to this 10-foot strip that's under consideration tonight?
Not to my knowledge. I do know that the general plan does talk a lot about connectivity to the San Luis Obispo Creek. It is a natural resource here in the city that a lot of people do use and enjoy. Specifically, though, the general plan does require connectivity to the creek in the downtown areas. So what we're looking at tonight is not considered a downtown area. So there are really we're not really looking at any connectivity there in this residential neighborhood.
Okay, and there's no evidence of historical use of this right-of-way? There's not. I went over there recently and tried to find, I didn't see that there was a path or anything. It doesn't look like anybody walks through there.
Right. It was dedicated in 1947 for uses such as boating, hunting, fishing. I don't believe that it's been used that way in a very long time. The requirements for a summary vacation, such as what we're looking at tonight, are that the public row or street or whatever we're looking at, specifically a row or right-of-way tonight, have not been used for 5 consecutive years preceding the abandonment request. And that's been confirmed with the city biologist, utilities, et cetera.
And instead of 5 years, it's probably more like 50 years, right?
I would imagine so, yes.
Okay, and is there anything requiring us to abandon this, or what's triggered this effort to do this?
Yeah, so there's nothing really requiring the city to abandon this right-of-way. This abandonment application was submitted in concurrence with a lot line adjustment application. So an application to go ahead and adjust that lot line between the two 1998 and 2006 San Luis Drive. And what we're looking at, if we do proceed with this abandonment and a possible lot line adjustment, which is currently in review status, is possibly the lot line adjustment, bringing these building setbacks, side setbacks, into more conformity, because as they are now, they are not conforming. For a one-story house in a residential neighborhood under 10 feet tall, the setback requirement is 5 feet. So the potential lot line adjustment that we're looking at will bring these buildings into compliance with the setback requirements where they currently are not.
All right, so each of the two neighboring houses would get an extra 5 feet of actual property?
Yeah, so essentially when an abandonment is done like this, the lot line will by default go into the middle, into the center. So yes, 5 feet each will go to either side. However, once the lot line adjustment is considered and possibly processed, we're looking at the lot line conforming to what we call an existing structure, meaning the 5 foot or the 5 foot tall is from a different project, a fence there between these two houses, such that the lot line is going to better conform with what we call existing structures, which is something that the municipal code does spell out.
Okay, so this is not an easement. This is actually city property right now?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And, I mean, the houses aren't going anywhere. They're not going to move. I mean, there's a lot of non-conforming stuff out there. I'll stop talking for a minute and just see if there's any discussion from my fellow commissioners here.
And just, I saw in the staff report, it says that the city has not utilized the public way, but from your comments a moment ago, it seems like there's no evidence that anyone else is using it at all either, right? We don't have any evidence that there's a lot of foot traffic or anything else on it?
That's correct. No evidence that there has been any use for the intended activities such as hunting and fishing and swimming. We did also confirm with the utilities, PG&E, AT&T, Spectrum, SoCalGas. Those were all listed on the initial survey map. We did confirm that they do not have any use for that public road before we brought this item to tonight. The engineering supervising civil engineer is here tonight if you had further questions about that specifically, but staff did confirm with those companies.
Thank you.
Any other comments, folks?
I have a question of staff. Commissioner Houghton mentioned the bridge that goes across. So this is not in close proximity to the bridge, and
No, it's like 2 blocks up.
yeah, so that bridge will still be in open access and people do use that. Okay.
Quick question. Is it actually a right of way, like is it actually a clear right of way currently? I didn't go out to the neighborhood, but the satellite images that I can pull up show like vehicles parked there, and at the street level is like some trees or vegetation. So could it even be used for for access right now?
There are, as the public right-of-way currently is, there are currently trees and fences in that, throughout the way. So, if there were, an interested individual that would like to go back there for its intended purposes, I would imagine it'd be, pretty difficult to get back there considering the existing landscape and the existing structures.
Okay. Maybe one final quick question. Given that we're giving each of these neighbors, we would be giving each of these neighbors about 800 plus square feet of new property, does that impose any sort of fiscal impact on them for tax purposes or in any other way? Or is it just kind of like an administrative, just kind of paperwork essentially?
Or do we get paid for that?
Well, there is an application fee for a street abandonment to be processed, so the answer is yes. As far as tax implications go, I'm not too sure about individual property owners and the tax implications there.
In my day job, I work for the county tax collector, so I can tell you that they will probably be reassessed, and yes.
Any other comments from this side?
I went out and visited the site, and I'm looking at it on Google Earth right now, and per the earlier comments, I agree, there would be a substantial amount of work to have to be done in order to create a path for the public to walk up a 10-foot path at this time. And then if you kept on going, you had a bridge across Sandals Creek, it would go to the property that's the Motel Inn. I don't know what the status of that project that we reviewed a couple times, but that's where it would go, is over to that property. So I certainly agree that we want to have as much access to the creek as possible, but I think in this day and age, in this time, this one would be fairly difficult to do. You'd have to get some money put aside and create a path and build a bridge and then negotiate with the property over on the Motel Inn to get some sort of access onto their property. So I think it'd be a tall order. I mean, not that it can't be done. I think if, the public will was there, you could do it, but you'd be spending substantial amount of money, purchasing property, building bridges to do it.
Yeah, so I'll respond to that. The Motel Inn is something we saw, about a year ago?
Yeah.
And there was development plan for that. It had a number of small houses and that, I think we approved that.
A couple times.
Yeah, so something's going to happen over there at some point. And I would say that whatever items are in the 10-foot right-of-way right now would be viewed as an encroachment, right? And so from the city's perspective, and that's really who we represent here, it is our property. And I'm really in favor of keeping it for some future use, even by a future generation, if that's what it takes. And I understand this lot line and kind of cleaning up this business, but really what's being asked by the two houses is to just take 5 feet from each of them from the city for what's been designated for future public use or at any time. So that's kind of where I come down on this. I'm not really in favor of it. And I guess what I would maybe suggest, is there a possibility of converting this to an easement from actual fee simple ownership?
I'm going to defer to Tyler Corey on this one, the Deputy Director of Community Development.
There would be a possibility of converting it to an easement, but I think, as was mentioned, that city staff has looked at this and has no purpose to keep an easement there. There's no reason for the city to access this, access the creek through this way, and so that's been identified as not a need at this time, and it hasn't been. So, but it's possible. Okay, and so we're talking about the city using this right of way in the last 5 years, and the implication would be we went back there with a chainsaw to clear out the creek or something like that. But then when I heard the original concept of this was for hunting, fishing, which really is public access, right? And so when we say city access, I think it includes the public too. So here's what I'm going to say about this, and maybe we table this for a future to talk about it more and bring it back. And can I ask for public comment? Is there any public comment on this? Do we have?
I have one other point too.
Okay.
So looking at the staff recommendation, we're actually called upon to do two things here. One is to find whether it is in conformity with the general plan, and secondly, if we would recommend that the city council abandon it. Do you see any indication that it's not in conformity with the general plan?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, because the general plan requires or encourages us to maintain public access and interconnectivity and pedestrian access, and the creek is really a feature that I think that we want to protect and protect access to it as much as we can. Yes.
So a couple, maybe two quick questions. First one, are fishing and hunting currently allowed in the creek?
No.
They are not. Okay. So that use is a mute point essentially at this point. Okay. Second one, maybe more a question for you, Mr. Chair. Given that I'm going by rough calculations, looking at a satellite image, but about 600 feet south of where this little strip that we're looking at, there's the Andrews Bridge where you can access the creek, and about another 600 feet north of this point, the neighborhood essentially ends, cannot develop any further, so you would have access there. Would that not be sufficient access to the creek for future uses?
So I don't know if I'm qualified to judge if that's sufficient access. You know, one of my markers for this sort of thing, I lived in Boulder, Colorado for many years. The creek is a huge feature of the downtown there. And there's a path that goes all the way along, and every cross street pretty much accesses the creek path. There's bridges galore. It's a totally public place, and it's hailed nationally as a treasure. We have our downtown section that is great. And we've got small efforts underway to kind of expand that access. And the new stretch right along by the tennis courts at the high school was just kind of redone there, and so the creek's visible there. So I don't see much upside for the city in abandoning this property, and I don't really see that much upside for the residents. I know they're the ones who initiated this probably, and their tax bill's likely to go up a little bit. And if it's so, that's I'm kind of just putting my feet down and to try to hang on to property that the city owns.
Actually, you actually just made me think of one other question, because there really might not be. Oh, actually, I'm struggling to understand the benefit to the two property owners as well. So, what would be the benefit for them? Like, what were the reasons, I guess, behind their request? And I see we have.
So can we have public comment on this without a card and doing the whole thing?
Yeah, certainly. Please just announce your name for the record.
Yes, Land Surveys, and we represent the client. I'm sorry, too loud?
You got to speak right into the mic.
Oh, you can probably hear me.
No, it's for the TV.
Oh, okay. Okay, can you hear it?
Is the red light on?
Okay.
Okay.
I'm Carrie Margison with MBS Land Surveys, and we represent the client on this project. And I hear your concerns about the public access and the creek back there. The reality is it hasn't been used in 88 years, but I would request that rather than make a recommendation for denial, you table it, continue the project, and give myself and staff maybe a little more time to look at whether or not there really is any viability for access through there and a potential creek. I'm not sure just what the zoning is behind the property. I'm not sure if the city already has easements back in here. I mean, there's a lot of information we could look up and maybe provide to you that would make your decision easier either way.
Zoning on the other side is CTS, which is commercial, tourist, and what's CTS? Service? Right, so it's basically commercially zoned. I don't know if that has a bearing on whether or not we could connect to it, so. So that's yours, rather than denial, you're requesting tabling to have more time to discuss and review, et cetera? Okay, we can consider that. And Commissioner Flores, do you have a comment?
One question first. The green band, is that a different zoning line? On page 2 of the staff.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yes, that green band corresponds to the San Luis Obispo Creek, and it is essentially zoned conservation space.
So who owns it? Is it owned by the city, or is it part of the properties that are adjacent?
I'm not sure. I'll defer.
You see the property lines on the map, so most of it is owned by the homeowners. But a question was raised whether there's an easement, so I'm curious about that.
So the city does not have an easement over San Luis Creek. It is just zoned conservation and open space. And just to reiterate, city staff has reviewed this application thoroughly with all affected potentially departments, and the city staff has no reason to want to keep this in city ownership control at this time. There's no benefit at this time to the city, and there hasn't been since I think it was initially offered and accepted. So that review has been completed, and so we would not need any more time to come back with the same recommendation.
Okay.
I have a question for staff. Could you explain again the trigger for this, which was a lot line adjustment, and who applied for it, and the purpose of the lot line adjustment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe I have a couple slides that might lay this out more clearly. So I'm just going to go ahead and share those so we can kind of talk about this in more detail.
While that's getting pulled up, I'll respond to the hunting and fishing comment. And I think those were representative ideas of public access, basically. These days, it might not be hunting and fishing. It might be reflection, meditation, walking along the creek, hearing the burbling, et cetera.
I was purely curious more than anything.
Good point, though.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've pulled up some slides regarding this item. We've already referred to this zoning map image that shows where this 10-foot wide public way is located. This is kind of an aerial view of the location. As you could see, the area is surrounded by trees, even in the creek area. So it'd be, pretty difficult to get back there from a point of view of a member of the community. And right here now, what we're looking at is, obviously, this is the 10-foot way that is looking to be vacated. As you can see, the structures shown here are not meeting the required side setback requirements for an R1 zoned building. Got it. Thank you. Here on the dotted line kind of between here is labeled fence on wall. So this is what qualifies as what we call an existing improvement. And what the property owners are looking to do is so this blue line represents what the lot line is going to default to at the time of abandonment. And what the property owners are looking to do is to kind of adjust the lot line between their properties such that it follows this existing improvement here. So we're looking at something like this such that it largely follows the fence here. There is a requirement in the municipal code, chapter 16, that a lot line must be perpendicular to a street. So for that reason, it's going perpendicular to the street instead of exactly following that fence there, which wouldn't be quite perpendicular. Here's another option of what that might look like. So right here in the red line, you can see we're following the existing fence here. And here's another option of what this may look like. There is a requirement for lot lines to be in straight lines. So that's why, we're looking to complete this in that manner such that each of the lines are straight instead of, exactly following the fence.
Okay, and thank you for that. That's mighty helpful. And so it was a private property owner that submitted the lot line adjustment for this?
That's correct, and I believe it is with the intent to just bring those properties into conformance with these side setback requirements, because as it currently stands, we are looking at, existing buildings that are less than 5 feet away from the current lot lines. So really what we're looking at, if we're looking at what benefit is added, is we're looking into coming more into conformance with those requirements.
And so the lot line adjustment would not be able to go through unless this was vacated, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So, sorry, are they currently then legal non-conforming? Is that the status of the property? So if they wanted to do any site improvements, they might be prevented from doing so until they bring it up to conformity currently? Is that right?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, so this would basically address that.
Correct.
Gotcha, thank you.
I mean, I will say that that sort of condition of nonconformance happens all over this town. I have a 0 lot line garage. It's right on this property line. And I'm on Lincoln Street, and there's pretty much all the way down the street. It's, there's walls right on the property line. So, all right, we've taken a fair amount of time on this, and I don't want to get too down into the weeds. And I'm inclined to take the suggestion of tabling this, and I understand your position, the staff's position, that you've looked at this and you've got your point of view. And my point of view is that it's really worth our consideration to let this go or not. And so I would move that we table this until a future time.
Chair, could I make a comment before we take a vote on that? I did, just given that many of the concerns brought up have to do with access to the creek, I think it's worth noting and keeping in mind that even if the public did have access through that right of way, the creek is regulated. Like our municipal code prohibits, travel off path. It prohibits travel in areas that are close to the public, and our creek and riparian areas are otherwise protected. So just because this public right of way remains open does not mean that people would have access that may be contemplated.
So how does that apply to the downtown where we got kids splashing around in the pools and we've got paths right along the creek, left and right?
So that there is, path or travel allowed on paths and in areas that aren't closed, but if there's not designated paths, if it's not open to the public, the riparian area is protected against access.
Okay. A path could be constructed at some future time. I see heads shaking.
So there's no plan to build a path along San Luis Creek behind these homes. It's not contemplated. It's not in any future planning efforts. So that's not a part of any future, capital improvement program. It's not in our general plan.
Okay.
Plus, the city would have to acquire an easement for people to use the creek area.
Right.
Have that this time.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm not in favor of tabling this. I am inclined to support staff's recommendation. We've heard from staff that even if we said continue this, bring it back later, they're not going to have any other information. They're not going to change their recommendation, it sounds like. And it does sound like this would allow the non-conforming status to be cured for these two properties. So when we're ready for motions, I would move to adopt staff's recommendation.
Okay. We've discussed this quite a bit. We have a motion to approve the staff recommendation on this poll item 4B. Do we have a second?
Wait, do we actually have a formal motion? Because I heard you speak about tabling, and I wasn't sure if you were making a motion, and then I heard you speak in favor of one, but I didn't hear you make one either.
I didn't make a motion. I stated my opinion that I was in favor of tabling. So I didn't actually.
I don't want to cut off discussion, but once it seems like discussion's winding down, I will be making that motion. I have not yet.
Gotcha.
Oh, okay. I thought you did.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry about that. And is it okay to do kind of a straw poll and see where people are on this? Is that allowed?
The way that we would do that is you would make your motion, we would
Yeah.
take the vote. If it passes, then, that's the result of the action. If it fails, then we consider other motions.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and move that we table this until a future time. Continue? It's my first time doing this, so.
Right, continue
Here,
to a
anyway.
date
Continue?
uncertain, sounds like.
Okay.
Do we have a second? Okay, without a second, that motion fails.
Okay. Do we have any other motions?
Then I will move to adopt staff's recommendation.
And I will second that just because I wanted to say the adoption of the vacation, because it sounds like the funnest thing we can do. So I just wanted to say vacation. It just sounded fun. But that's a second.
So we have a motion and a second. Do we have further discussion on this item?
I'd like to say one or two things if I could.
Okay.
First, I had one more question.
Your thing's off. Now it's on.
First, I had one quick question of staff. Was the natural resources manager consulted about this as part of the staff review of all of this? Just to check.
Oh, yes, they were.
Okay. And secondly, just to make a point or two here, when I read about this, I started out with about the same view that you had, Chair Houghton. In fact, I even started thinking a little bit, well, gee, if a hotel or two had a way to use that path over a bridge through there and into the neighborhood, it'd be a great quiet bikeway route into town that's not quite the same as trying to be right next to the freeway and kind of go up the hill and around on Monterey Street there. But the more I thought about it, I thought about how complicated it is to build a bridge and the kind of easements you need for all of the superstructure that would be probably much longer than the creek itself, the damage maybe to the creek, and all of that. It sort of added to my sense that that there's probably some pretty good reasons that staff are not ready to support this, because my first notion really was, you know, this is open space. We need every little bit of pedestrian access that we can possibly have. So I definitely started that way. But the more I thought about it, it sounded like, honestly, it's kind of a bridge to nowhere project. I just feel like there's just no practical way. And even if one hotel had it as the, you know, as the Apple Inn going to run their bicycle path and ask for, you know, some access through the new motel, if that ever gets done, and that somehow we have a new bridge there. And so I think my mind goes back to Commissioner Flores's point, is that we have a really good access one, and that needs to be protected, and maybe that's what we've got for that neighborhood. So I kind of backed away from it at some point. So that's why, otherwise I would have been the second on your motion. So that's my comment. So at this point, I'll probably vote in favor of this motion. That's on the
Okay.
table.
Any other discussion? Commissioner
Yeah,
Khan?
I was like to say, I went down the same path you went down thinking about it. I certainly appreciate your thoughts on this, because it was kind of my thoughts too, is boy, I'd be ashamed to give up to it. But I agree that it's a hard row to hoe, and so I'll be voting in favor of the motion also.
Other comments? I have a closing comment, Commissioner Flores.
As much as I don't like to reward a homeowner that went ahead and built things on property that wasn't theirs, and now granting them conforming status, there doesn't, you know, hearing from staff, there doesn't seem to be any purpose that's going to develop from this. There's no easement along the creek that would facilitate it. So I think it is, and there's no one from the audience in protest of this. I think we should go ahead and approve it, staff recommended.
Okay, before we have a vote, I'll just close out by, you know, when I think about this, I'm really thinking generation down the line. And once property is forfeited or abandoned, then we can never get it back, except through adverse action. And it would be a bridge to nowhere, except we don't even have a bridge. So, I mean, I hear what you guys are all saying. It's low probability anything could happen here, but it's not zero. And who knows what this all looks like 25, 30, 50 years from now, and it could be something then. So that's why I'm not in support of doing this, but it is time for a vote. So unless there's more discussion, I'll ask the Deputy Clerk to call roll on the vote for the motion on the table.
All right, seeing no further discussion. Commissioner Cooley,
Yes.
Commissioner Munoz Morris,
Yes.
Commissioner Flores,
Yes.
Commissioner Jorgensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Khan,
Yes.
Vice Chair Tully,
Yes.
Chair Houghton,
No.
and that motion passes.
Okay, thank you for indulging in that discussion. And I will comment too, I think that this topic probably didn't belong on the consent calendar in the first place. I think that there's some substance to it. So, but we were able to handle that, and we did. So thank you for everybody's comments. Okay, so next item. Public hearing item before us is now review proposed text amendments to the Municipal Code Section 1786080, Cannabis of Title 17 zoning regulations. And before staff begins their presentation, do any commissioners need to report ex parte discussions of contact with anyone who has provided you with information not on the record? Seeing none. Would Cannabis Business Coordinator Ivana Gomez please present the report?
Okay, good evening, members of the Planning Commission. As you could probably tell by our discussion so far, I'm recovering from a bit of a sickness, so if you see me reaching for some Halls or some tea, bear with me. I'm going to do the best I can here. Okay, so sorry, got ahead of myself. Tonight I'll be presenting a review of text amendments to section 17.8680 of the Municipal Code, also known as the Cannabis Zoning Regulations. The recommendation before you tonight thank you. The recommendation before you tonight is to adopt a resolution that recommends that the City Council introduce and approve an ordinance that amends Section 17.8680 of the Municipal Code to clarify specific land use and operational requirements for commercial cannabis activity. The Planning Commission's role tonight is to review the proposed amendments for consistency with the general plan and state law and to provide a recommendation to the City Council. So here's a summary of the proposed amendments tonight. First we're going to look into some clarifying language for land use requirements for retail storefront operations, specifically regarding the buffer requirements or distance requirements from these types of cannabis businesses. Second, we're going to discuss some repetitive language and kind of go over where that might occur in the cannabis zoning regulations. And third, we're going to go over some clarifying language to the operational requirements for micro-business operations. The proposed text amendments are scheduled to be heard before the City Council as part of the annual cannabis program update scheduled for later this spring. The annual update is something that the cannabis program has done every year since its inception at the request of council, and it really just serves as an opportunity every year for staff to present recommendations to the council that refine our administrative and operational processes. The proposed amendments to land use requirements and micro-business requirements are essentially cleanup items, so nothing is changing. Rather, the updates are intended to provide greater clarity on what's already existing regulation. Okay, as I stated before, the first amendment is intended to clarify buffer requirements for retail storefronts. So I want to begin by kind of going over what are buffers, when were they adopted, and how do they relate to what we call cannabis business overlay zones. So buffers, these are, like I said, distance requirements. They were adopted in May of 2018, which is really when this program was first being designed. And like I said, they apply only to retail storefronts. And the reason this is because retail storefronts are the only publicly accessible cannabis business. And they are as follows: 1,000 feet from schools and public parks, 600 feet from licensed daycare centers, and 300 feet from residentially zoned areas within cannabis business overlay zones. So what are cannabis business overlay zones? Well, they were adopted in September of 2018, so a few months after the buffers were considered. There are 9 designated areas in the city where all cannabis businesses may operate subject to zoning, and they're shown clearly on the city's zoning map. As I stated, they do account for these buffers, and they also account for local conditions such as major roads or arterial streets and railroads. So essentially, these cannabis business overlay zones were created based on these pre-established buffers. So what council did was, consider what these buffer requirements are and create these zones that are largely away from these what we call sensitive uses. So what we're looking at tonight are some proposed amendments to clarify what these requirements are. The proposed amendments, this language occurs a few times within the cannabis zoning regulations. And so what we're proposing is to clarify that the 1,000-foot buffer from schools and public parks / public playgrounds withholds whether that's located within or outside of a cannabis business overlay zone. 600 feet from licensed daycares, whether located within or outside a cannabis business overlay zone, and 300 feet from residentially zoned areas that occur within a cannabis business overlay zone. Staff is also recommending adding specific language to section 178680 that clarifies that a new adjacent land use does not affect the continuation of an existing use that was issued a use permit under the standards of the cannabis regulations. So in other words, let's say a cannabis retail storefront was issued a use permit, they went through the operator permit process, got a use permit, and 3 months later down the road, a daycare pops up and it's within 600 feet of that location. What we're saying is that the existence of that new daycare is not going to affect the continuation of a retail storefront that was issued a license under the conditions and the requirements of our municipal code as it's adopted. Okay, moving away from land use requirements and into some of that repetitive verbiage. So staff is proposing an amendment to section 178680E5B. The term CBZ overlay is referred to as CAN overlay in this specific subsection. Both of these terms are interchangeable. They mean the same thing. They refer to the same zoning designation. So what staff is proposing is just to replace CAN overlay with CBZ overlay, so that is consistent with the adopted zoning map and with throughout other areas in the zoning regulations. Okay, moving on to another repetitive verbiage statement. We're looking at section 178680A. This is the purpose statement of the cannabis zoning regulations. It really just states the intent and the purpose of these regulations. What staff is proposing is to remove the Specific Controlled Substances Act, or CSA, classification of cannabis from this purpose statement. This is because we're looking to avoid having to update this section whenever the federal government changes that classification. As many of you might be aware, the federal government has been talking and discussing possibly descheduling or rescheduling cannabis. And so what we're looking to do is just remove that specific Schedule 1 designation from the purpose statement while still reinforcing that the provisions of the cannabis zoning regulations are not intended to affect or alter federal law in any way. Moving on to operational requirements for micro businesses. So micro businesses are essentially cannabis operations that engage in at least 3 of the following: cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and retail sale, whether that's by storefront or by delivery. And this all occurs under one roof, clearly delineated and clearly separated. While it's worth noting, we do not currently have, or the city does not currently have, a micro business right now. It is important to add some clarifying language here because in 2023, the City Council adopted Ordinance 1725, which expanded retail storefront hours. So what used to be 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. is now 7 a.m. To 9 p.m. And it also updated age restrictions. So now individuals aged 18 through 20 with a valid medical recommendation may access retail storefronts and purchase cannabis. However, these amendments were not applied to the micro business subsection of these regulations for micro businesses engaged in retail. Micro businesses with retail sale are required to follow the same rules as any other retailer. With any other cannabis retailer. That is reinforced in our own municipal code as well as in the Department of Cannabis Control cannabis regulations. So what we're looking to do is to propose an amendment that aligns our micro business regulations with the retail storefronts for hours and age restriction requirements, specifically around signage requirements. Okay, and so with that, that is the conclusion of my presentation, and I am open to discussion and questions. Thank you.
Okay, let's, you have a question for staff, Commissioner Tolley, and then we'll go to Commissioner Cooley.
Okay, so I read through the staff report. I understand everything that I get it. It's a common sense update. But can you tell me how the appeal, this will affect the appeal that's currently out for that micro business, for that retail dispensary that we approved a couple months ago?
Yeah, so this will have really no effect on the appeal, actually. What we're doing is just clarifying language. How the appeal relates to the recommendations tonight is that it really brought to staff's attention that there was a need for clarifying language.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cooley.
Yeah, just a couple of things. On the clarification point, I found the citations to council intent to be persuasive, so, I'm in support of that. Just had a question about the micro-business aspect of this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but don't micro-businesses, and I'm assuming your amendments here are just meant to be comprehensive, but don't micro-businesses require cultivation as part of them? Am I wrong or right about that? And if so, is there anywhere in the CBZs that is appropriate for cultivation as well as other business types?
So micro businesses are just required to have 3 of those commercial cannabis activities under one roof. So there are micro businesses that might be manufacturing, distribution, and retail sale. As far as, is there any appropriate areas for cultivation to be conducted in one of these cannabis business overlay zones? There is. There are. That's kind of why the zones were created, was for any cannabis business. So that's kind of what's confusing about it, is that any cannabis business must be located within one of these zones, but retail storefronts are further subject to buffer requirements. Of course, there are zoning requirements for cultivation, so not every area or every parcel within a cannabis business overlay zone is going to be appropriate for cultivation.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Other questions of staff? Commissioner Munoz-Morris.
Just a quick thought. Nothing really objectionable about the presentation. It seems pretty straightforward, so thank you for that. But I was just wondering, I don't know if there would be retail operations or considered something else, but in looking at the evolution of cannabis, if somebody wanted to open up, I don't know, like a cannabis cocktail bar, is there any consumption on site that's allowed for any of these establishments in any form?
So cocktails, not allowed. No concurrent alcohol and cannabis use. However, I get where you're going with this. Currently, as our code is written, the city of San Luis Obispo does not allow consumption lounges, which is what we what the state kind of refers to as a coffee shop type of cannabis, coffee/cannabis type shop. However, there was legislation passed this year that does allow for consumption lounges. Specifically, it allows retailers and micro businesses to prepare and sell non-cannabis food and beverages and host live entertainment in designated consumption areas, provided that local jurisdictions authorize these specific activities. So currently, our municipal code does not allow consumption on site, and so, yeah.
And, okay, thank you for that. And that legislation, it sounds like it also would not allow consumption on site of cannabis products. It would allow food and beverages that are non-cannabis products. Is that correct?
So I misspoke there. So consumption lounges have been allowed for maybe a couple years now. They exist all over the place, largely in the LA area. There has always been consumption of cannabis products allowed on site. But what we're looking at this year is legislation that allows for the additional sale of non-cannabis beverage and food items, as well as entertainment or ticket sales for things like musical entertainment. So what we're looking at is really the possibility to allow retailers to broaden the horizon of what's possible for making sales at their facility.
And when you said consumption on site is already allowed, I'm guessing you're saying elsewhere, because we don't have any consumption lounges or however we're designated. Okay.
Correct, under state law, California state law.
Okay, gotcha. All right, sounds like it might be coming up in future cycles then. Thank you.
I just have a question. If you could pull up the slide that showed you added the language of whether it's not outside the overlay zones, because the residential doesn't have that same clause. It says within. So with my understanding of that, if there was a residence located outside the zone but within 300 feet, that would be okay? And if so, why the purpose and the change of language on that third clause from the first two?
Yeah, so what you said about if a residentially zoned area was outside of a cannabis business overlay zone, but 300 feet away, that would be okay. The reason why we're coming forward with this amendment, not quite a change, as this is how this has been, the buffer requirements have been interpreted since the inception of the program and implemented. The reason really being that was adopted in 2018 is that if 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 the city required a 300-foot buffer from every residentially zoned area in the city, there would be very, very limited space for a cannabis business to be established. When we're looking at schools, public parks, daycare centers, we're looking at, children-specific sensitive land uses. It would be nearly impossible for us to require that cannabis businesses are located 300 feet from every residentially zoned area in the city. As far as why we're coming forward with these amendments, staff did significant research into the staff reports from 2018 when this program was really first being designed and implemented. And it is very, very clear that this was the intent, the legislative intent in those staff reports. It's also what is adopted on our current city zoning map as well.
So why even have the 300 setback within the zoning area for residential?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer for that, but.
So I'll try. So just to kind of recap, I think when these buffer zones were originally established, they looked at locations that they're separated by natural barriers. So Broad Street, natural barrier, railroad tracks, natural barriers. Those are the features that kind of got us to where these buffer zones, the outline of some of these buffer zones. So to your question or point of if somebody lived across Broad Street and they're within 300 feet, that's been accepted as okay based on these buffer zones being adopted as shown. There are buffer zones within these cannabis overlay zones for residential uses because what we were concerned about was that you could have a cannabis retail store across the street, a residential street from a residence. So this at least provides those residences some separation from a cannabis retail store within the overlay.
Or even right next door, right?
Or even right next door.
I'd just like to reaffirm what Tyler has just mentioned. That is mentioned in the staff reports from 2018 as well. And like I said in my previous slide, these buffer requirements and cannabis business overlay zones were created based on, considering what we call major barriers. So the railroad, Broad Street, Tank Farm Road, Higuera Street, major roads like that also provide a significant barrier to other residentially zoned areas.
But at the north end of your slides, there is just a single street there that is not a substantial barrier. It's a little side street. I don't know which one it is. I guess the property across the street is not zoned. It's CR. No, there's RSF there too. So let's see what page.
Commissioner Flores, may I ask what slide you might be referring to?
I am on page, there's no page numbers on this.
Is that figure 1?
Yeah, figure 1 of item 5A, yeah.
Page 27 of the packet.
Okay, thank you.
Teamwork.
Okay, so I see Broad Street's a definite divider and the railroad tracks are a definite divider, but what about that little street at the north? And looks like there's SF zoning there.
So that would be Roundhouse, I believe, the PFH zoned areas where the fire department 1 is, or fire station 1 is located. And you're specifically asking about which parcels?
The parcel just outside the border there, to the north of the border.
The one in red?
Yeah.
A little strip in red on the top, or 2 strips? One is CR, the other one is, or CRSF, is that what it is?
Well, that's zoned to commercial retail with special focus.
Is that the Ace Hardware?
Okay.
Or right next
That's
to the Miners?
actually Stallworks and then an apartment complex in the CS zoned area, as well as Miners. So
Okay.
CR, that's going to be where Stallworks construction company is located. And then the CS just north of that is where we have some apartments, I believe, and and Miners Ace Hardware, yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so there are a lot of apartments. So there is a lot of residential zoned that is closer than 300 feet now, is what you're saying, and that would be allowed. Okay.
Well, actually, the when we refer to residentially zoned areas, we're referring to R1 through R4 zoned areas, which is essentially what we call a base zone. When we're looking at, mixed use or, a commercial zone that happens to have apartments, that is not what these regulations are considering. What they're considering is that base zone, which is what the R1 through R4. So something mixed use or something that just simply has apartment complexes or residential homes would not be considered to be residentially zoned area.
So it's about the zoning, not about the use.
That's
Is that right?
correct.
See, so we're looking at these zones too on the zoning map, and the only R zones I see at all are on the Broad Street section. There's this R3 SPD that is in the kind of the orange hatch. It's in a 300-foot red hatch too. And there is, there's new structures going up there that definitely are residential, but that's within the zone. So, I mean, with this business about the 300-foot residential within the zone, it seems like there's almost no place where that even applies. So we're kind of coming back to why do we even have it? But we're not here to rewrite it necessarily. We're here to clean it up. So, is there anything you can say to like put that to bed for us?
Well, the reason you see that the striped red line is because the zoning map does have that 300-foot buffer of residential zones in that legend. And the reason we're looking at South Broad Street tonight really is because this is one of the only areas in the city where a cannabis business overlay is. This is one of the only cannabis business overlay zones where residentially zoned areas occur.
I see.
There used to be another one by the airport, and it has since been rezoned to commercial service. So that no longer appears on the map. So that's why the legend of zones on our adopted zoning map only refers to the 300-foot buffer area of residential zones within the South Broad, because that is really the only area in the city. So, I think we could say that in 2018, staff did a very good job of finding zones that are largely away from residentially zoned areas. But as Tyler mentioned, where that does occur, we are still requiring a 300-foot buffer. And again, this is residentially zoned areas, so R1 through R4 zoned parcels.
Okay, and the airport thing came before us, what, a year ago or something? Because I remember we address that? Well, let's let that be. So the crosshatch that we have on the screen right there, that's covering that R3, and that's the 300-foot exclusion for the R3 zones that are within that cannabis overlay. Is that right?
That's correct. So we
Okay.
are looking at about half of the cannabis business overlay zone that's for use. There is
Okay.
a little bit of it that's south of that buffer that is zoned M. So that wouldn't be appropriate for a retail storefront, though.
So that's the only place where we have any kind of R zoning within a cannabis overlay.
That's correct.
Okay. So we do need it. We need it for that spot right there, right?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Tully.
Okay, real quick, this slide that we're looking at, it looks like there's two cannabis overlay districts side by side. Is that right? On the right side, we got the manufacturing and PD. Is that a natural barrier? Like, why isn't okay, so that's why.
So that's a great question. There's a grade change there.
Okay.
And then there's access changes there. So the manufacturing area takes access off of Orchid, whereas this is more of an integrated neighborhood in this other area. But there is a significant grade change there, so they aren't really connected and they're at different
So we
grades.
consider that.
Yeah, there's a retaining wall all along that strip right there, yeah. Okay. Other questions? I have a few myself, but. And I'll just tell you guys, I ask a lot of questions at these things. And you still put me here. But my intent is to, always let you guys have all your questions and I'll back clean up. So just letting you know that. Okay. So this business about a daycare pops up. Let's see. So if we have a cannabis retail and then a daycare pops up within the 600-foot, right? That's okay. If the daycare wants to come up second after the cannabis, is that okay? But if it's in the other order, then it's not okay? Is that the way that this works?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, great. And then you had a slide on that said 18 plus with valid ID. but you said with valid medical ID, right? So I'm assuming that the text uses the word medical, is that right?
Yeah, and I do have a slide that shows the exact text that we're looking at. So right here is the micro business development standards, just a couple of them, and these are the ones that we're looking at tonight. So we changed the hours of retail sale, and then we're looking at this type of language. So oddly enough, actually, the age requirements are mentioned in a different section of this municipal code, and it's kind of a cover-all, catch-all for all commercial cannabis activity. What we're looking at tonight is specifically adding this type of language that clarifies what the signage requirement for micro businesses with a retail storefront are. As far as the medical recommendation, that language is here. Essentially, you not only need a valid ID, you also need a medical recommendation from a physician if you are between the ages of 18 and 20 to access.
Okay, that's what I thought. But when you had the slide, it said 18 plus with a valid ID, and it didn't say the word medical, then, okay. But we've got it in the actual ordinance that is under consideration. Okay. And then this micro business thing, that applies only to cannabis, is that right? There's no or is there a micro business? Does that apply to any other kind of business?
No, what we're looking at tonight is the cannabis zoning regulations. So there's, to my knowledge, not another micro business definition. If there were, like I said, we're specifically looking at Chapter 7, Section 178680, which is the cannabis regulations, which defines micro business as a commercial cannabis activity.
Okay, fair enough.
Would a brewery with a tap room kind of be a micro if they're doing production, distribution, and retail or sales?
So micro business is only referred to in the cannabis section of the code.
And it's in alignment with the state definition of a micro business.
Yeah, so we're always trying to track with the state. Speaking of that, so I think that we addressed this before, but the state now allows consumption lounges or coffee shops, if anybody's been to Amsterdam, let me know what that is all about. So, but we don't. But we could. Is that the way that stands right now? If we, that would be a council level thing and municipal code change?
That would absolutely be a council level change. I imagine it would come to you all at the Planning Commission first. Like I said, as we currently have our municipal code adopted, we do not allow for on-site consumption specifically. So there are a few places in the municipal code, I would imagine including Chapter 9.10, which is the general cannabis regulations, and Section 178680, which is the cannabis zoning regulations, that would have to be evaluated to allow a cannabis retailer to engage in that type of activity. We'd also probably be looking at an amendment to their existing use permit.
I love how well you know all these regulations. Thank you for this. This is really, I know. So if a consumption lounge, I mean, the path that would likely happen here would be an applicant comes to the town, to the city, and says, we want to open one of these things. And so that would then precipitate a consideration of revision to the municipal code, which would first come to us for a review and a recommendation to council. Is that what would happen?
Almost. We wouldn't really be looking at an outside applicant. I think what we'd be looking at is an existing retailer as the applicant in this case, because you must have a established cannabis retail storefront in order to
go consumption?
Pop up a consumption lounge, exactly. So we're not looking at somebody applying for a consumption lounge. We're looking at an existing retailer applying for consumption. If we ever were to open an application period for cannabis retail storefronts, I think, and we had already adopted consumption lounge verbiage in our municipal code, we would probably have some type of application process that asks that up front. What are you planning to engage in your at your location? And that way the evaluation of that conditional use permit application would consider all things retail storefront, if there's delivery, this is something that you guys reviewed, I think, last year, as well as if they're looking to do consumption lounges. I think for existing retailers that have already got a use permit that doesn't consider consumption, they would have to go through like an amendment. So that's what we're
And then, an amendment to our municipal code.
We'd have to amend the municipal code first, but then existing retailers in the city would have to amend their existing conditional use permit to allow consumption.
Well, that's kind of where I was going with that, because, and has there been any expression of interest amongst we have two right now, two retailers? Has there been any expression of interest in developing a consumption cafe?
There's definitely been questions and inquiries verbally, but no formal interest has been submitted.
And so then my next thought was, well, if that is likely to happen, is it worth addressing that in this cleanup, but you, probably not tonight, right? I mean, so we'll let that be, I suppose, until there's an interest and a need to consider it. So, okay. And my last question was about this 1,600-foot arcs that includes outside the cannabis overlay zones. Do those currently carve out any parts of the existing cannabis zones because of those radii?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
So the 1,000-foot from schools and the 600-foot from daycare, with the existing schools and daycare, do any of those arcs of 1,600 feet touch any of the CB overlay zones?
No.
Okay.
Not right now. Like I said, I think in 2018, staff did an excellent job of finding areas that are away from these types of sensitive uses. So what you're looking at right now on this slide is a map of where existing schools are. That includes preschools, elementary, junior high, and high schools. As you can see, there's pretty much one, I believe that's Hawthorne Elementary, that just kind of goes into that cannabis overlay, and PF is not even an eligible zoning
that's the fire station,
district
right?
for for cannabis businesses. So,
that's the answer I was expecting to hear, so that's great.
And we have the same thing here with licensed daycares.
Okay.
So that's shown in yellow. Orange is the same thing, the residentially zoned areas. But
Okay.
as you can see, these licensed daycares are pretty much largely away. I know we're only looking at one cannabis business overlay out of 9, but this is really just to demonstrate that that's why these zones were chosen.
And then we had the construction underway of the Natural Healing Center or whatever it was right there on Broad Street. And then that fell apart for whatever reason. But was that location? I'm kind of speculating now, so I'll just let that go. Forget it. Okay. Is there any further discussion, or are we ready to entertain a motion and a second? Any further discussion before we have a roll call vote? Okay, hearing none. Deputy Clerk, could you please call roll on the motion that is before us?
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to clarify for the record that there's no public attending at this point, so no public comment.
I forgot to say that because that's on my little thing here. I'm going to go ahead and say it. Do we have any public comment on this item, Deputy Clerk?
No, Chair, we do not.
Okay, great. I'll get better at this. Okay. So,
rocky start, Mr. Chair.
What?
So you're off to a rocky start.
Oh, geez. Going off the script already. Okay, time for a vote. Let's go.
So the motion was made by Vice Chair Tully. How do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Munoz Morris?
Yes.
Commissioner Cooley?
Yes.
Commissioner Flores?
Yes.
Commissioner Jorgensen?
Yes.
Commissioner Khan?
Yes.
And Chair Houghton.
Yes.
And that motion passes.
Okay, well done. All right, we're near the end here, and I want to say something that I forgot to say when I first moved to this seat. I wanted to thank Chair Cooley. Nice job for the last year of running the meetings, and I really appreciate the attention to detail and the very even-handed way you did this over the last year. Thank you. Okay. So would Deputy Community Development Director Tyler Corey please provide us with an update of the staff update and agenda forecast?
Great. Thank you, Chair. Our next regularly scheduled meeting is April 23rd, and that will be canceled due to lack of items, so no meeting on the 23rd. And then looking into May, we have a meeting on 5/14 and one on 5/28. So we have a few re-reviews that are coming back of fraternities. And so it'll be Fraternity Month here at the Planning Commission in May.
And those are what again?
For violations of existing use permits. I believe the 3 that we have are of the older use permit type from going back to the 80s. So these, we're working through those, and we'll be bringing those forward for consideration.
Okay.
So I don't have, exact fraternity or dates yet, but it's looking like we're reserving those couple meetings in May for that. One other thing that's looking like it's moving on the 514 agenda is just our general plan conformity of the city's capital improvement program. And that's just part of formality. It's a part of the city's financial plan, and it requires a motion and an approval here from conformity review of the Planning Commission. And then on the 28th, we also have a presentation from Cal Poly planning students looking at the Upper Monterey area. So they're doing some work there, looking at, land use types and connectivity, different, improvements that could be made to streetscapes and uses. So they are working on that project and will be presenting their conclusions to the Planning Commission.
No doubt they'll be asking for a creek path and bridges, right?
All possible. All possible.
Okay. All right, is that it for you?
That's it for me.
Okay, thanks. All right, so the April 23rd meeting will be canceled, and the next regular meeting is scheduled for May 14th, right, at 2025 at 6 o'clock p.m. in council chambers, 990 Palm Street, San Luis Obispo, and I finally get to hit this thing. We are adjourned.